I would like to welcome our New York City Comptroller, Scott Stringer.
Thank you, Jessica. And it's really great to be in the community tonight via Zoom. I wish we could all be in person, but perhaps with the preliminary news about the vaccine, perhaps it won't be long before we're all together having successfully beat COVID. But in the meantime, we are Zooming to your home, and I'm really glad everybody's here. Let me just briefly talk about the economy and some of the challenges we're facing as our city grapples with the economy and opening up the economy and our small businesses once again. We should think back to February 2020, when the unemployment rate in the city was 3.4%. And then over the last 10 years, we had actually created 970,000 new jobs during that 10-year period. So think about this, 3.4% unemployment in February, almost 1 million jobs created over the last 10 years. Once COVID hit in March, within 30 days, the unemployment rate went from 3.4% to 20%. We went from the lowest to the highest in our history. And those 970,000 jobs, we lost 900,000 of those jobs in a little more than 30 days. This is the greatest economic challenge our city ever faced. We saw over the last many months food lines, 2,800 businesses closed, 520,000 small business employees lost their jobs. This economy has never been in this kind of free fall. And so the challenge for our city is how we reopen. And how we reopen through the lens of medicine and health, how we help the people who are most vulnerable in our city. In other words, you can't simply open up the economy the same way we closed it. So many of our struggling communities suffered the most because of COVID, and that's something that we have to address. We need to start laying out a new small business agenda, and I'll send in the chat the 25-point agenda I have to open up small businesses. Before COVID, we had, from 2007 to 2017, went from 5 million vacant square foot of storefront space to over 11 million vacancy. And now we're facing 16 to 17 million square feet of vacancy. In many of our communities, we've lost whole commercial corridors. And that is why we need to, with a combination of tax breaks and tax incentives, bring our small businesses back to life, help them develop a tech platform, being more proactive, making sure we don't lose any more of our businesses. This is the central economic challenge we face from Forest Hills to Flushing to Kew Gardens from around our city. Queens has been hard hit, but so has the whole city. So as controller, we're also working to make sure that as we look at the economy, we address our budget shortfalls. Obviously, we're going to need a stimulus package from Washington. That got a little brighter and more hopeful in the last few days. And part of tonight's town hall meeting is to talk about our economy from a macro position, both federal, state, and local, but also to address the issues you care about in the areas of education, healthcare, and that's why we bring you this town hall meeting. So for those of you who have personal questions or issues that pertain to you, if you tell me that question and we can't help you tonight, a staff member will call you by 10:30 tomorrow morning. Money back guarantee, just kidding. If we can help you tonight, we will. We have all of our staff standing by to help you. And the reason I love these town hall meetings is because you can't do government top down. You have to mix it up and talk to constituents. And I've done these Zooms and town hall meetings all over the city. And I'm really happy tonight that the people joining me are some of the best elected officials in the city. And I'm going to introduce them in a few seconds. Let me start out by introducing somebody who has played such a critical role in the community as a former member of the Assembly, but now as our Congresswoman. She's somebody who's built a national reputation fighting for working people and the middle class. She has been a thought leader on so many issues, and a lot of New York City's recovery will depend on her and the roadmap that she gives us to try to create an energy around a federal stimulus package in Washington, She's a very good friend of mine. She has given me parent advice over the years, so that's not lost on me because many of you know I have 2 little kids, and the Congresswoman has always been there when I needed her the most. But let me introduce someone I'm proud to call a friend, our Congresswoman Grace May.
Thank you so much, Comptroller Stringer, and thank you to you and your entire team for once again taking time out of your schedules to listen to and respond to the needs of our constituents here in the best borough. I know you can't say that, but best borough here in Queens. I'm always honored to be with my colleagues in government as well. And Comptroller Stringer is being polite. We usually tag team at various events across Queens and across the city, depending on whose kids are behaving better that day. And his actually usually wins. So, so thank you so much, everyone, for all that you do. And I want to thank so many of our community leaders who are on the call tonight for taking the time, because these are really unprecedented times. Our community leaders have really stepped in and pitched in so many ways that aren't even obviously part of their responsibility, but this is the best case of neighbors looking out for each other. And so many people have stepped up, from our kids to our senior citizens. And I'm just so proud of all of you. And I hope that everyone is safe and healthy. I know that it's been a real tough 8 months. Many people have grieved families and friends, juggled parenting, family, and schooling needs with work, feared literally for the lives of our children, our neighbors, as we, those of us who have the luxury of being confined safely in our homes. But you know, these few months have really proven to me and people around the country actually that we are stronger when we work together. New York has really, especially Queens, been at the epicenter of the epicenter, especially back in the months of March, April, and May. And so while we've come through the worst, there is so much more that we still need to do. You all have heard about the legislation that the House in Congress has passed, the HEROES Act, and we need to make sure, it's been literally months since the House passed this legislation, and we need to make sure that the Senate will pass this life-saving legislation as well. We need anything from stimulus checks, state and local funding, testing resources, help for our small businesses, increases in SNAP, and just the ability to get more people food. We need relief for people who can't pay rent and their mortgages, and for, you know, our schools to reopen, and hazard pay for so many of our essential workers and so on. So I'll keep it brief. I just wanted to know that, you know, I want you to all know that we are all here for you. What we've worked on has literally been from the ground up, like the comptroller said. So I wanted to thank you all for being here. And once again, thank you, Comptroller Stringer, for being here in Queens tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you for participating. As we can see, we usually call this a roundtable, but this is turning into one of the biggest roundtables. Perhaps this is really a town hall meeting. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible in the time that we have. But again, I want to also thank the participants who were here with us, great elected officials. I want to bring on our state elected officials for brief remarks. Let me first introduce a very hardworking senator who really speaks for working people in the city. He's someone I've really had the privilege of working with for more years than I'm going to admit, but he's really done a great job for his constituents in the district. Please welcome State Senator Joe Addabbo.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller, and thank you very much for allowing us to be together tonight. And I want to thank you and your team for putting this all together. To my colleagues, good to see you. And to the residents who are watching tonight, thank you for spending some time with us. You'll all be somewhere else right now, maybe with your families. I don't know what's on TV at this point, but nevertheless, you're with us today because you care about the community, and I appreciate that. I want to say thank you. And this is really how government should work. You know, right now, tonight, you have the city, the state, the federal government together, And that's what we've been doing during this COVID challenge, really working together, trying to find solutions. It hasn't been easy. As you know, we don't have a magic wand to cure all the ills and all the challenges that we face, but we try. And that's what we're going to continue to do as we look to get beyond and navigate through this COVID pandemic and by working together. And so the idea here is we start tonight and it doesn't end tonight. It obviously goes forward as we look for solutions to the problems that either are raised tonight or that we face going forward. The comptroller is right. We have taken an economic hit, and basically the COVID pandemic has affected pretty much every aspect of our life. And we know that as elected officials, we know it because we hear from our constituents. But that's what we do as elected officials. We listen and then lead. And so whether it be with our educational system, whether it be with the workforce, whether it be with the person's health, and that's physical and mental health, we need to address these issues. And this is a great city, and it will be great once again, but only when and if we could work together. I'm optimistic as we go into the year 2021 with a new presidency, a new leadership, and one that is calling for unity already. And I think that's what we're going to need. We're going to need people to unite, regardless of which side of the aisle you are on, or what your political philosophy may be. The bottom line is with this pandemic, which knows no boundaries, this pandemic does not discriminate. It basically affects everyone. Well, there's no room for politics when we deal with these pandemic issues. So I look forward to working with everyone as we go forward. And again, I'm thankful for being on tonight and look forward to the conversation tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Adabo, for being here tonight to answer questions and for all your hard work. Now, let me introduce somebody no stranger to any of us, a senator who's really fought hard on education issues and local issues, as well as being a great state senator as well. A good friend of mine, State Senator Toby Stavisky. I'm also here with my Deputy Controller, Maxwell Stringer, who will not be speaking tonight, but will be doing homework shortly, right?
Yes. I'm just printing up my sheets.
Okay, thank you. Senator?
Thank you, Controller. I would have had mice, but he's too big. My son. Thank you for bringing us all together. And as my colleagues have already said, we all work very closely together, and that's very important. We respect each other because we care about our constituents, and these are important issues that we've been discussing, and they all really stem from what the controller said at the beginning, the COVID outbreak, whether it be economic or healthcare. These all stem from the pandemic. And I must tell you, while I was watching television on Saturday and I saw the dancing in the streets and the happiness on people's faces, and that's not a political statement, it's a statement of reality that we should all be together. And let us hope that this feeling of joy will pervade through the entire year, next year as well, because these are issues that affect people's lives, whether it be education, economic development, returning, helping the small businesses, whatever the issue, we're going to work together to make things better. And I was asked to, by the councilwoman, Karen Kozlowitz, to explain that she just had oral surgery. She's fine. And she wanted me to say that her office is open, as is mine, by appointment, but people should contact her office also, as they should contact mine, if there's anything specific that we can help with. So again, I thank you, and I hope we can, for the new year that's coming up, continue to progress and to work together so that people can return to whatever the new normal is going to be. So thank you, Mr. Controller, and your deputy.
Yes. My deputy quit.
I'm still.
No, he's doing homework. And now, thank you, Senator. And now a great young assemblyman who just had a new baby, a newborn, but he doesn't look that tired, I think. It's really great to have him. He's doing such good work. and he's really partnered with me in so many events. I'm really glad to call him a friend. Please welcome State Assemblyman Daniel Rosenthal.
Thank you. And thank you to the comptroller for doing this. This is not the first town hall he has done in Central Queens in recent weeks. And now more than ever that we can't go to the community board meeting in person or the civic meeting during the week, that we're in this virtual world, it's much harder to interact with constituents. So we appreciate that your office has put this together and allowed us to create a platform we are able to have that conversation and that dialogue. Because the city of New York, the state is definitely going to have a difficult path ahead. There's no question about it. Closing down is really the easy part. It's making sure that we reopen in a way where the businesses that were forced to close can reopen. Part of the closing downs really exacerbated what was already an existing struggling climate for small businesses. The eastern part of Forest Hills was in that red zone a few weeks ago, and we were getting phone calls from those small businesses who were forced to close again, that saying they didn't know if they were going to be able to survive another shutdown. Fortunately, our numbers have gotten slightly better and they're allowed to reopen again. And also, if anyone knows of any of the small businesses that need assistance or need that PPE or hand sanitizer, we have in our office available. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you again to the comptroller for organizing this and allowing this dialogue to happen tonight.
Thank you, Assembly Member. And now, Jessica, where are you? Let's come back in.
I'm here and I'm ready to go with questions. So Thank you everyone for being here again and for your opening remarks. I'm going to go through the questions that came in and we'll get to as many as we can. So to start off, we have a question about the budget. The question is, how is the city going to manage the budget given the tremendous shortfalls in tax revenues? What plans are being made to evaluate the budget holistically to make meaningful changes so that proper agencies are doing what they should be? And can we start with the comptroller on that one?
Well, if I can't answer that question, I don't know who can, but it's a very comprehensive question. Look, the budget that we see right now in excess of $4.2 billion is certainly manageable. It does not put us into a great situation, but the immediate challenge is how do we balance this budget? So what I've suggested is that we need to use all the levers at our disposal to bring next year's budget into balance. What do I mean by that? It means we have to do a combination of things. First, we have to draw down some of the reserves we have, which is $1.5 billion. Second, we need the mayor to do a robust efficiency analysis of every city agency to find out the waste, to find out the excess contracts that have never been used, meaning money is just sitting in these agencies. Because the mayor never went through this exercise in like 7 years, we actually have a lot of money that we can save, money that would stave off firing essential workers or costing us youth programs. I estimate that we could save over $1 billion just going through this exercise. As a city elected official, I cut my budget by 4%. I gave back contracts we weren't using, returning millions of dollars, and we didn't lay off one person or hurt the functioning of the comptroller's office. So I think the mayor's office and every agency should go through this exercise. If you do that and we get $1 billion, now we're at $2.5 billion in savings. I will also share with you that over the last few months working with OMB and our own office, part of my job is to refinance existing debt. I've done that over the last 7 years. We've saved $2 billion, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We are in the process of doing more refinancing that will result in hundreds of millions of dollars in savings. So we could get to $3 billion before we have to borrow money, before we have to raise revenue. In other words, we've got to start coming up with a financial plan now that gets us to close the budget to the $4 billion level as soon as possible. The mayor has got to propose a plan sooner rather than later. The answer, and this is where I've had the fight with him, is not to borrow $5 billion and put debt service on the city, costing our children and young people, and then putting our young people in an impossible situation, having to pay debt service that we simply can't afford. We need to do the work of government. And I do want to thank Senator Adabo, Senator Stavitsky for being there when I went to the Democratic caucus of the state Senate, where we had a real discussion about putting together a financial plan. Senate Democrats did not bite on an unlimited borrowing plan with no strings attached. They get great credit for this. They could have taken the easy way out. They decided to remember wisely how we got into the crisis in the 1970s when we borrowed money for operating expenses. Senator Stavitsky knows that all too well, and I'm really glad to partner with them. I will keep people informed in terms of how we're dealing with our city budget, but it is the first step to recovery. There's the short term and the long term, but a balanced budget is required by law, and it's the short term.
Thank you. Senator Adabo, did you want to weigh in on that as well?
I agree totally with the comptroller. You know, the bottom line is, you know, the city looks in the mirror and checks out its own finances. I remember when I was first elected to the city council in 2001 on the heels of 9/11, and when we went into our first session in 2002, we roughly had a $6 billion deficit then in the city budget with very little help from the state government or from the federal government. And it is about making the appropriate cuts, and it is about trying to find ways of raising revenue. In this day of COVID, this negative impact by the COVID pandemic is not going to be just this year. Our economic impact from COVID is going to be 21, year 2022, and so forth. And the comptroller is right. We need a plan, both short-term and long-term. And we need to look at all the alternatives. As we keep an eye on the federal stimulus money, we do need to look internally to see what can be done to help the city and its fiscal situation. And that's where the state legislature obviously will look to see if we can help, we would.
Thank you. Do any of our other electeds want to speak to that, or shall I move to the next question?
Can I just weigh in on that one for a second?
Certainly.
I couldn't agree with my colleagues more. What happened in the late 1970s, was that we were borrowing out of control. It's like going to the supermarket, buying your groceries for your dinner time meal and paying for it over a 5 or 10 or 20 year period. It makes no sense. But I think the real issue in terms of our $15 billion state deficit is stimulus money. That is so critical to our future. And hopefully there will be a generous recognition of the needs of state and local government. And I know Congresswoman Manga's done everything she can. And hopefully with a new attitude in Washington, we will be successful.
Thank you all. Appreciate those answers. And I'm going to move to the next question now. We're going to switch gears a little bit. We've been asked about local businesses. What are the next steps to open up our local businesses and maintain our local economy? So again, I'm going to ask the comptroller if he'd like to kick us off with that.
Well, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, our small businesses are truly suffering in ways we could never have imagined. You know, there are 2,800 businesses closed. We lost 520,000 small business employees. We have 285,000 businesses that employ 50 or less. So this city cannot come back economically until we have a robust small business plan. We did a lot of good moving restaurants out into the streets. I think we forever changed the landscape of the city, and we saved a lot of businesses. Obviously, we have to take great care going forward with the uptick in COVID. But at the end of the day, a combination of stimulus money, as well as a new way of thinking about how to help small businesses and city government is going to be necessary. You know, I think we all agree that city government is a problem when it comes to small businesses. I'm a former borough president. I used to love going to small business openings and cutting the ribbon. Problem is that for all of us elected officials would celebrate the small business, the city agencies would come in and they would attack the business. They would set up fines and fees and erroneous taxes and literally drive the business out of business. We can't do that anymore. We actually need help for the small businesses to develop their tech platform. We need to ensure that we're going to get the tax credits to the businesses so they can expand and the tax relief they need, because we're asking them to pay more to create safe space within their stores or outside their stores. We need a massive investment in our small businesses. I will put on the chat our 25-point small business plan. I think there's a lot there that we can do. You know, even when you think about the Department of Buildings, which is a huge bureaucratic nightmare. On the one hand, they're supposed to approve plans for development, but at the same time, they're supposed to do inspections. And you need an expediter to even talk to the state agent, the city agency. It's enough already. We need a real small business plan, and we need it now before we lose so much of our communities. You know, in every neighborhood you go to, we don't just see the loss of one small business. We see all these corridors vacant. It's like something out of the 1980s again. And that's dangerous from a criminal justice perspective. We want lit streets and we want the liveliness of New York. That doesn't happen from Wall Street. That happens from Main Street right here in these communities.
Thank you. Thank you. Congresswoman, would you like to chime in on that?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. And I don't have a 25-point plan like our comptroller, but I can share a little bit about what we've been working on in Congress. First of all, before the pandemic, last year actually, we were able to secure funding to open the first small business development center in our congressional district at Queens College. This is a service that is free of charge. This is a service that provides multilingual interpretation and translations. People can go to them for help or call them on the telephone. SBDC, our office is always happy to connect you. Second, you know, we talk about the legislation that Congress has passed in the past few months. I will say that, like the comptroller mentioned, feedback from all of you has been crucially important. From the start of what we passed in Congress to what we've passed so far and what more we need to do, every time we've passed legislation and expanded or created programs, we've gotten feedback from you. For example, when it first got passed, the EIDL loans and the PPP loans, you've probably heard about them, we literally weren't seeing the money go towards our mom and pop shops in our neighborhoods like Forest Hills, like Rego Park. And so we were able to tweak the next variation of this legislation. And so I just want to say that because it's so important that we are continuing to get feedback from all of you. I will say that in the HEROES Act and in the HEROES Act 2, there is legislation that continues to expand upon the loans and the grants that our small businesses get. And I you know, there was a report by the State Comptroller Napoli that talked about how, for example, the restaurant, the food and service and drink industry have really suffered. It's predicted that up to 50% of our small businesses in the food industry might not come back. And so there is legislation, bipartisan legislation, that as of November 7th, Mitch McConnell in the Senate said that he would be willing to look at. And so this legislation creates a grant specifically for food and drink establishments and would help revitalize our small businesses in terms of, you know, the food and drink industry. So those are sort of the immediate things that we've done and still need to pass.
Thank you so much, Congressmember. Did any of our other panelists want to speak to that? Okay, we're going to move to the next question. Okay, our next question is about CEC 28. So CEC 28's diversity planning process is paused due to COVID, but we've been told it will resume at a later time. It feels like DOE already knew what they wanted to do and the outcome is predetermined. How can we get a better process? That is the question that just came in. Senator Savitsky, would you like to start with that one?
Well, it's things I think are going to change next year because we're going to have a new mayor and a new controller, et cetera. The diversity plan, and I was at a number of the CEC 28 meetings and hearings, and I particularly troubled by the fact that the City Department of Education, the chancellor, has not any kind of guidance in terms of the gifted and talented programs that are so critical to Forest Hills, Rego Park, and in fact, the entire city. And secondly, there is no plan for the specialized high schools, the SHE-SHAT exam. There is nothing that has been said. We have written, we have asked, and the City Department of Education has been totally silent on how they're going to provide the incoming classes for the specialized high schools. We do have a process where, through the Discovery Program, those who haven't passed the exam but have come close are given intense preparation and admitted if they're qualified, and they usually are. There's no plan there. And the controller has been talking about the lack of planning in those areas. They've been totally silent on the issue of the gifted and talented programs and the other diversity programs. And that I find very, very troubling.
Thank you, Senator. And we actually have a few education-related questions coming in. We are also being asked about blended learning and the changes that the city had said there was a blended learning period, and then they changed that blended learning period for opt-in. So I want to throw that into the discussion too. Comptroller, would you like to speak to the blended learning period?
Look, I want to say that the one thing that cannot be tolerated is a Department of Education that is indecisive and gives no clear direction to parents. There is a larger conversation in the city that we have to have on diversity and inclusion, but we don't do it this way where we're silent on the questions that parents have. And that also includes the blended learning option that was wisely proposed to be a rolling decision for parents. In other words, if you didn't feel comfortable putting your child in a classroom setting, perhaps you had pre-existing health conditions, an elderly grandparent in the household, you could learn remotely. And then you would have an opportunity every quarter to opt in. The mayor gets up and with the snap of his finger says, no, this Friday, and I mean this Friday, is your deadline for the rest of the school year. What is he doing? Does he even understand what it's like to have young children in a household that require babysitting and sometimes the decision of which parent is going to go to work and stay home? What are the health implications of a Friday deadline? It is simply mind-boggling to me how the Department of Education continues to work for everyone except the people the education department is supposed to serve, which are the children first, the parents, and then the teachers and principals. So there's no planning. There's now a whole change in the system. I find it absolutely disgraceful. I will tell you that on a personal level, for our third grader and second grader, one of them you met tonight, we had as a family decisions to make, and now we're grappling with these decisions, and they're being dictated by a bureaucrat who's embarrassed that he doesn't have enough kids in the school system. So he's basically blackmailing parents to bring their kids into school by Friday. Shame on him. Shame on Carranza. It's a total lack of leadership. And now I'm putting aside my controller hat as a parent. If this doesn't make you run for head of the PTA, and though I'm not a candidate, I don't know what will.
Thank you. We have more education questions coming in, but I want to ask if any of our other elected panelists would like to speak to what's been raised so far. Okay, then I'll move to the next question. We also have a question about the technology, the challenges with the technology, with the laptops, with Wi-Fi, with how this is working out for families and the problems this is creating. So again, I'll start with the comptroller on the issues of the tech challenges with the iPads and the Wi-Fi.
There's a real equity question to education right now at the DOE. lost in all of this is the fact that we have 100,000 children who are in homeless shelters who don't have connectivity or enough iPads. We have parents who literally have 2 or 3 children in a household learning on one remote iPad device for 3 children with very little internet connectivity. We are basically creating a 2-tier education system, one for people who have capacity or parents who have capacity, and another for those who don't. And I fear that through this pandemic and through this year, that the kids who are going to fall farther and farther behind are the children who are already behind because they don't have the same privilege as my kids do, the ability to go out and order a new computer, order a new iPad, double up on the connectivity. And city government has got to go door to door and go to these children because they did not cause this pandemic. They are not responsible for the incompetence of the Department of Education. I continue to press the DOE and the mayor to address the inequity in the remote learning space, but we are running out of time and then we have to deal with it. And we're going to continue to do this, whether I have to go and do every single audit every single day on the state of play for these children who are really going to be in trouble. And it's something that, I'm going to work with Joe and Dan and Toby and Grace, because the one thing we all care about are these children who they're not ours, but we're never going to meet them, but we know that we're not serving them.
Thank you. And we have someone in the chat box saying, is this going to be only about budget and education, or are we going to discuss other topics too? So I hear you loud and clear. We will move to other questions. I'll give our panelists one last chance. Does anyone want to speak on any of the education issues here? Okay, our Congress member would like to jump in.
To our viewers, I promise I'll make this quick, but I just wanted to put a plug in for Comptroller Stringer because him and I have been working on this issue way before the pandemic. He issued a report, 1, 2, 3 years ago about this issue where 1 in 5 New York City children on a good day don't have access to the internet. I've been working on it nationally. 12 million kids on a good day do not have access to the internet. They have to go to their library when it's open. And it's a lot tougher in more rural and suburban areas where they go sit in a parking lot of a fast food restaurant. This is all before the coronavirus pandemic started. We've passed legislation in Congress, my bill, which would provide internet access for all, working through hotspots, working through our libraries, like someone in the chat said. And so this has to be a top priority, especially now with the coronavirus pandemic.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
And also, in my other hat, I chair the Higher Education Committee in the State Senate, and this has come up repeatedly. And to his credit, the Chancellor of CUNY is trying to make sure that every college student, every CUNY student does have access to either a laptop or a computer and has access to Wi-Fi. We hear this all over the state, the need for broadband coverage and so forth. It has come up repeatedly in Higher Education Committee meetings statewide.
And can I just, I know we want to go to other topics, but I do want to thank Congressmember Meng for the work she's doing nationally and reminding everybody that there has to be a national response. But at the end of the day, this is the role of what city government has to do. I mean, we have LinkedIn that has not expanded to neighborhoods. That's failed. We have connectivity and internet access over the last 7 years that really wasn't expanded to communities that need it the most. And I agree with Grace. The pandemic is now highlighting the discrimination in so many of our communities. And this is something that must be a priority. And I know we have to go into other topics, but it's something that I think really gets our blood boiling.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move to the next, unless I'm just going to give everyone a moment. Anything else on education? Okay, we will move to the next for all our attendees. We also have questions about food access. So let's move to that. Here's the question. We're seeing long pantry lines in communities throughout Queens. What is being done about the food crisis in our city? Comptroller Stringer, do you want to kick us off on that? The food crisis in our city.
Look, I think that, first of all, anyone who needs food assistance should be calling 311 or one of the elected officials, including my office tonight. The mayor on the one hand announced a $170 million investment to make sure New Yorkers don't go hungry, but he also cut the home delivered meals program by 25% in the fiscal 2021 budget. And we need to spend a lot of time in a massive enrollment plan, similar like we did with the census, to get people to enroll in the WIC program and the SNAP program. I'm very nervous about winter and homebound New Yorkers with the uptick of the virus. But food insecurity is one of the big challenges we've had in this pandemic. And, after that, we have to not just think about providing food, but also the kind of healthy food to conquer issues of obesity and type 2 diabetes. COVID showed what happens when we don't invest either in the green economy or in healthy food security programs. And I think it calls into question what our long-term food strategy is going to be for New York City and the country. But it breaks my heart when I go to a food line or you deliver perishable goods to a community event. I was out in Queens over the weekend, last weekend, just to see all of these amazing volunteers delivering crates, feeding people on food lines in the middle of a parking lot. And you just realize that so many volunteers and New Yorkers are stepping up to help. And now government has to do its share.
Thank you. And Congressmember Meng, I know you've been working on these issues from DC. Would you like to jump in on this as well?
Sure. First, I want to thank all my colleagues on this call because they have all of us, public servants across the city have spent so much time and resources making sure that our food pantries are able to take care of the increased number of constituents and New Yorkers that have been taking advantage of these pantries. We've all been to the lines. There are thousands of people, lines around and going on for blocks and blocks. It's heartbreaking. We've even seen situations where kids are standing on line for their parents or their families because the parents, the adults in the household have to work and they're the only ones that can make the time to come pick up food to literally feed their families. I want to give another plug for some of our local partners and organizations. La Jornada, Met Council, Masbia, who I think just went 24/7, City Harvest, and more. Common Point, people are doing so much in our communities. From the federal perspective, there's three ways that we've been focused on. One is, for example, the pandemic EBT. We've worked with our state elected officials on this call, where you may have gotten a few weeks ago a blue and white card that hopefully you can throw out that had, I think it's about $400 per student. And these are for kids who are in hybrid or full-time remote schools. So each child in your family should have received one of those cards. Second is the ability during emergencies, such as the California wildfires, for people to be able to use SNAP benefits to buy hot foods. What we saw, especially during March, April, and May, were that you had essential workers who were literally working like 15-hour shifts, and they weren't able to go home and cook a meal, but they weren't able to use benefits to buy readily cooked foods and at the same time help our restaurants as well. And the third is farmers to families. Queens was really shortchanged in the last round of the program, which stemmed from the CARES Act that Congress passed. Queens families were left out just because of the way that the contracts were distributed. So we've had to work a lot with the elected officials on this call and also our Queensborough president to make sure that Queens families weren't shortchanged. So again, I want to thank so many of you who've been volunteering your time and giving resources as well.
Thank you, Congressmember. Do any of our other elected panelists want to speak to the issue of food insecurity? I see Senator Adabo.
Yeah.
We'll do Senator Adabo and then Assemblymember
right.
Rosenthal.
Again, I agree with my colleagues, but the idea here is nobody should go hungry. And I'm so glad the comptroller said to reach out to any one of us, our offices. Nobody should go hungry during these days. We'll find a resource to get food delivered or to get someone the food that they need. And again, I know Congresswoman May mentioned some of the groups. Yeah, and she's right, Med Council and others. I have visited many. They do phenomenal work. But what I'm also liking to see is the fact that we had an issue with food waste prior to the pandemic. It's a major issue for me. I can't see wasting food along the curb. I see it being wasted from our schools and some of the major chains. What we're seeing now is before there is no, again, the reduce of the food waste so that it does get to those who need it. And so we should not have an issue with food waste, nor should we have an issue with somebody, going hungry these days. So food availability is a major issue that we will continue to work on, but please do not hesitate. If you know someone who's in need of food, please do not hesitate to get in touch with any one of our offices.
Thank you. Assemblymember Rosenthal.
I just want to add quickly that, first of all, in the state budget, there was some emergency funding that went to the local food pantries, which had helped out. I know for us also, the way that people and the local nonprofits stepped up. For instance, many of our senior centers, Almanac at Queens Community House, and the Young Israel Senior Center, they had actually essentially changed their senior centers into food pantries and distributing. And the need is still real. And there's been a lot of depressing things in the news over the past 2 years. But one beautiful thing was that we've seen a lot of people, a lot of civic leaders step up. Just today, through a private donor at Almanac, we were able to secure through the civic leadership there, 4,000 families were fed fresh vegetables. And the good news is that private people were setting up and volunteering and donating money. The sad part is that, unfortunately, 4,000 boxes were given right here in Central Queens alone for people who need it. So the need is still out there, and there does need to be additional funding coming through.
Thank you all for your answers on that. And we're getting close to time, so we have a huge amount of questions. I want to assure everyone who's asked a question tonight, if we don't get to you, we will attempt to follow up with you tomorrow and get your question answered. I know we have more questions here than time to answer them, but I will try to slip in a couple more if we can just get a few more minutes here. So we have a question about federal aid and the Biden presidency and how things are going to change now that we have a new president-elect in DC and what that could mean for New York. And if it's okay, I think we'll start with the Congress member on this one and get her insights.
Sure. Thank you for that question. This is funding that New Yorkers desperately, desperately need. As I mentioned, the House side, our side, has passed multiple pieces of legislation. The most recent ones were Heroes 1 and Heroes 2. That would basically provide money for our state and local governments, which would help prevent a lot of the budget cuts in the city and the state government. It would help provide relief for rent and for mortgage. It would provide hazard pay for so many of our essential workers. The SNAP money that we were talking about before, COVID testing. Our incoming president, Joe Biden, said that he wants to shut down the virus. He does not want to shut down the economy. And that's so important. Before we can really have our economy in full strength and force again, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can, listening to science and experts. I'm glad he's putting together a task force to help us address this issue. We've completely lacked a national strategy. I've said before that our schools have a more robust system for handling head lice than this administration has for figuring out how to combat the coronavirus pandemic. And of course, stimulus checks and our small business relief type program. So hopefully that will be passed by the Senate. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader on the Senate side, said, I think the day or two after Election Day, that he is now interested in passing that legislation.
Thank you, Congress member. I'd like to open up to any of our other panelists who'd like to speak to that, to the change in DC and how that could impact us here in New York.
Well, seems to me that it's more, in addition to what the Congresswoman said, I listened very intensely to his speech the other day, and I think he was offering hope and possibility with the words that he was using, and hopefully we will see it turn the pandemic turn the corner, so to speak. But we have to remember that face masks are essential and social distancing, etc. And on a previous question, it's all part of the same issue of being prepared and having a plan. And I do want to add that in terms of food insecurity, CUNY has been at the forefront in resolving some of these issues where the students face the food insecurity. There's a chancellor's fund with millions of dollars in it. So I'm optimistic that things will change in Washington, and they will certainly change in the city and the state.
If I can, Jessica, mention, just to follow up what the Congresswoman talked about, just to remind people how critical it is, not just for a stimulus package, but for a big stimulus package to get this city where it needs to go. When you think about just how this economy shut down, the fact that the MTA needs $12 billion just to get back on its feet, there's no way a state or a city can even approach that. So this election had tremendous ramifications. The stakes were so high. And now what I think has to happen is we have to join with our senators and our members of Congress. The city has to also help organize the business community and the labor community, because we've got to get the money that we're owed. I remind people that New York City sends $22 billion to the federal government, more than we get back. $22 billion we send, that we never get that money back. We're happy to do it because we're New York, we're an economic powerhouse. But there comes a point where Senator McConnell is going to have to understand that we are, New York, the epicenter of the economy. That was true going back to 9/11. It was true in 2008 during the Great Recession. So this is no time to play partisan politics with the fact that New York's economy must be stabilized if we're going to stabilize the rest of the country. And that is why we're going to have to recognize that the fight is only beginning. We've got a whole lot more work that we have to do, given the dire need that we have and the fact that we're the epicenter of the economy.
Thank you, Comptroller. And I think we have time for one more question before we conclude. So quite a few people have asked about homelessness, both in the chat box and in pre-submitted questions, seeing an uptick in homelessness in the community and being concerned about the impact of homelessness in the community. So I'd like to start with the Comptroller, but give everyone a chance if anyone would like to speak about the homeless crisis in our city.
Well, nobody wants to see people suffer on our streets. Nobody wants to see people living in dangerous conditions in shelters. I've done those audits, worked with a lot of community-based organizations in Queens. And not to alarm people, but even pre-pandemic, my office estimates that in addition to having 60,000 plus homeless people, half are children, there's another 572,000 people who are one step away from homelessness. And part of what we've got to do is have a real strategy to reduce homelessness in the city, not just managing it. We went from spending 7 years ago $1.6 billion in maintaining our homeless services. We now spend $3.2 billion. We've doubled the budget in 7 or 8 years. And what do we have to show for it? More people living in the streets, more unscrupulous shelter operators making money on other people's misery. I do think we need to look at the programs that work and continue them and modify the ones that aren't working. We're also going to have to build the kind of affordable housing that we need, low-income housing. There's 30% of people who live in homeless shelters that have jobs. They can't find an apartment, and we have got to address that. That's what mayors have done going back to LaGuardia, and we've got to come back with a plan to do that as well. But I do fear that that there isn't a plan, in part because we siloed the homeless crisis and the need to build affordable housing. And somehow we've got to bring that back together. We need a new housing plan that meets the needs of the people who are the poorest in the city. And by the way, people think of homeless people, or people who are one step away from homelessness. These are the people who prepare food at a restaurant. They're waiters, they're bartenders, they're cab drivers, they're our neighbors. They're the backbone of our city. They're the aspirational middle class. And that means we have to change our policy. It's not like we're not spending enough money. We're just not spending it wisely. There's no plan. It's been bumbling and stumbling around the city. And I think it's time to make a change. So that's my macro view of where we stand as it relates to homelessness in our city.
Thank you, Comptroller. Senator Stavitsky.
Yeah, may I just add that I have a homeless shelter, as the Comptroller knows, in the Elmhurst part of my district. And I've been there, and most of the people are working. They just can't afford the rent. They've been evicted because they just could not afford it. And I think we have to take another look at our existing. We did a lot in Albany in terms of affordable rent control, rent regulations, and so forth, the MCIs. But we've got to do more, and we've got to make sure that the people who are living in regular apartments are not evicted because they can't afford the rent either.
Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to chime in on that? Okay, then I think what we'll do is we'll just move to closing remarks. I'll call on everyone and, maybe just take a minute or less if you can. And if you have any parting words you'd like to share with all of the hundreds of attendees who joined us tonight. I'll start with Senator Adabo.
Again, thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this panelist. And again, Mr. Comptroller, thank you very much for your service to the city. You and your team do a fine job. And again, thank you for arranging this. To my colleagues in government, always a pleasure working with you all. And again, to those who are with us tonight, for your questions, for your concern, you speak, and whether you're angry at elected officials, or you're expressing some sense of frustration, I guess we all understand it as elected officials. We know where it's coming from, and we know again, we do best when we work together. A lot of the issues that came up today, we can address, some we cannot. But the idea here is we try. And the idea is we know we have a lot of work to do going forward. Please do not hesitate to reach out to our offices. Let us know how we can help going further. But I do look forward to working with everyone here. We have a bright future ahead of us, but it's up to us on how bright it is. And so the idea is we need to work together, and we will continue to do so. A lot of challenges await. This is uncharted territory as we deal with this pandemic, but we'll get through it, again, by working together. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night and stay safe.
Thank you, Senator. And before I move to the next comment, I do just want to acknowledge Community Board 6 in Queens, who co-sponsored this event with us, partnered with us. Many members of Community Board 6 are here today, and they spread the word and they rallied their neighbors to join us. So I really want to thank Community Board 6 for their excellent service to the neighborhood and for their partnership tonight. Senator Stavitsky, would you like to give closing remarks?
Very briefly, not only do we want to thank the community board and the controller's office and his staff as well, but I think the quality of the questions reflects the concern of the community on a variety of issues. These are important issues, and we're going to do our best to make sure that we can resolve those that we can, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us. But I thank all of the 300 or so people who joined us. Those were really good questions, and hopefully we'll have some answers to those that weren't answered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Rosenthal.
Thank you to Comptroller Sugar and his entire team again for arranging this. We're always happy to discuss the issues that are going on, especially when we have limited forums these days to do so. I think I speak on behalf of all of my colleagues. We know a lot of people are having difficult times. If you need any assistance, our offices do remain open. Most of our staff is working remotely, but you can just call our office lines and we'll try to help you as much as possible. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us and listening to us tonight.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Congresswoman?
Thank you. I want to echo all my colleagues in showing our gratitude for Community Board 6 for being great partners and helping us spread the word and working on behalf of our community. Thank you, Comptroller Stringer, once again for your willingness to make sure that Queens residents know that we are an equal part of this wonderful city, and for your transparency. Many of you probably know this already, but when I first got involved in the state government and ran for the state assembly, it was Comptroller Stringer's reforms that helped improve the efficiency and transparency of Albany. In days long ago, you didn't even have to be present to vote in the state legislature. So thank you, Comptroller Stringer. Look, COVID highlighted a lot of the already existing inequities that exist in our city, especially for the people of Queens. And so we need to make sure that as we recover, whether it's our health or our economy, that we continue to work to address these inequities even after and when we've recovered, to help our working families. I know there were a lot of questions about education, and I don't want any tomatoes thrown at me, so I won't talk about education anymore, but know that I'm a parent of 2 public school kids. I literally have a kid in 8th grade, and we are hanging, waiting every single day, trying to figure out where he could and will go to high school. So I am completely empathize with what many of you are going through. And lastly, communication is key. Our office is working remotely, but we are always there for you. We often do mobile office hours. We'll come outdoors, if you don't mind. We'll come right outside your organization, house of worship, wherever you are, and we're happy to help take care of your members and our constituents. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I'd like to give the final word of the evening to Comptroller Stringer.
Well, first of all, I want to thank close to 300 people who came to our small roundtable discussion. This turned into a massive town hall meeting, and I think it's a reflection on the great elected officials who joined me tonight: Senator Adabo, Senator Stavisky, Assemblymember Rosenthal, and of course our Congresswoman Grace Meng. I just know how committed they are to this community and to the city. And so it's great to see this participation. Let me just also thank Jessica Silver, our moderator, who did such a great job. This is not her first moderating gig, but she's becoming one of the people that they ask for when we do these town hall meetings. And I also want to thank somebody who I don't get to thank nearly enough, and Grace Meng will agree with this especially, but Elaine Fan, our Queensborough director, is literally in every community at every meeting, and she cares passionately. And I'm just really glad that she's on tonight. And lastly, I just want to say that people who did not get their questions answered because there were just too many, and I wanted to leave you wanting more, our offices will reach out to you if you leave your information. We'll follow up with you. We have a rule in our office that everyone gets a call by 10:30 tomorrow morning. We extend it now because of COVID. It used to be 9 a.m., but it's kind of boss I am. And we will follow up with all of your individual complaints. And if you feel that this was worthwhile, we would love to do this again. So if there's enough community support for getting on a Zoom, we would love to continue the dialogue. In the meantime, thank you to my colleagues and electeds. All of you get home or get from your living room to wherever you're going in your house safely. That's new Zoom language. And we'll be back with you soon. And I thank everyone for participating. Have a good night, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. And one last thanks to Harris Kahn, our amazing liaison for Queens Community Board 6, who did so much work organizing tonight's event. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.